In the pre-dawn darkness of May 14, 2026, Saudi Arabia's worst nightmare materialized over the skies of Ras Tanura. Not one, not five, but 73 ballistic missiles and precision-guided drones descended simultaneously upon the world's largest offshore oil loading facility. Within 18 catastrophic minutes, the kingdom's ability to export crude oil from its eastern coast was reduced to smoldering wreckage. The Patriot batteries that cost Riyadh $11 billion over the past decade fired desperately into the night sky, interceptors streaking upward at $4 million apiece, only to watch in horror as the swarm tactics pioneered by Yemen's Ansarullah forces rendered America's most expensive air defense system utterly impotent. What the mainstream media is calling an isolated incident is actually the culmination of a strategic revolution in modern warfare, one that exposes the bankruptcy of Western military doctrine and signals the definitive end of Saudi Arabia's ability to wage war against its southern neighbor. The attack achieved what years of United Nations negotiations could not: the complete paralysis of Saudi oil infrastructure and the forced acknowledgement that no amount of American weaponry can defend the kingdom against an adversary that has mastered asymmetric warfare. The specifics are devastating. 73 projectiles launched from positions deep inside Yemen, flying trajectories that defied every prediction model in the Pentagon's databases, arriving in coordinated waves timed to overwhelm defensive systems through sheer mathematical impossibility. The first wave of 15 Quds 4 cruise missiles came in low and fast, hugging the Persian Gulf waters at wave-top altitude, forcing Saudi F-15 fighters scrambling from Dhahran Air Base to dive into dangerously low intercept profiles. While Saudi pilots focused on these sea-skimming threats, the second wave arrived, 28 Zulfikar ballistic missiles descending from the edge of space at Mach 7, their kinetic energy alone enough to penetrate reinforced concrete bunkers. The Patriot systems had to choose: engage the cruise missiles already inbound or attempt the nearly impossible task of intercepting hypersonic ballistic warheads in their terminal phase. They chose wrong. And then came the third wave, the one that shattered every assumption about Yemeni capabilities. 30 precision-guided drones, each carrying shaped charges specifically designed to pierce petroleum storage tanks, swarmed the facility from multiple approach vectors simultaneously. These were not the crude, remotely piloted aircraft that Western analysts had dismissed for years. These were autonomous systems employing artificial intelligence-assisted targeting, optical recognition software identifying specific infrastructure weak points, and synchronized attack protocols that demonstrated battlefield networking capabilities supposedly beyond Yemen's technological reach. The Saudi defenders fired 147 Patriot interceptor missiles that night, depleting stocks that will take months to replace at a cost exceeding $588 million. They successfully engaged 31 incoming threats. 42 penetrated the defenses completely. Now, here's what the international press won't tell you, what the Saudi Information Ministry is desperately trying to suppress, what Washington's military establishment refuses to acknowledge publicly. This attack represents the complete validation of everything Ansarullah has been developing for 7 years while enduring the most comprehensive aerial bombing campaign of the 21st century. Every missile that struck Ras Tanura cost approximately $80,000 to manufacture in underground facilities scattered across Yemen's mountain ranges. Every Patriot interceptor that failed to stop them cost $4 million, purchased from Raytheon with Saudi petrodollars that are now burning in the largest oil fires the Persian Gulf has seen since Saddam Hussein's forces torched Kuwaiti wells in 1991. The economic mathematics are brutal and irrefutable. Yemen achieved strategic paralysis of Saudi energy exports by spending approximately $5.8 million on munitions, while forcing Saudi Arabia to expend $588 million on failed defense, not counting the estimated $12 billion in infrastructure damage and the incalculable cost of halted oil exports from a facility that normally processes 8.5 million barrels per day. Before we continue, you need to understand something crucial that will reframe everything you thought you knew about this conflict. If you want the real story, the analysis that exposes what mainstream outlets are paid to hide, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because this channel is your only source for unfiltered truth about the shifting power dynamics in the Middle East. We are building a community of informed viewers who refuse to accept establishment narratives, and your engagement through likes, comments, and shares is what keeps this content flowing. Now stay with me, because what I'm about to reveal about the technological sophistication behind this attack will fundamentally alter your understanding of modern warfare. To comprehend the magnitude of what occurred at Ras Tanura, we must first understand the strategic context that made this attack inevitable. For 7 years and 2 months, Saudi Arabia has prosecuted an aerial bombing campaign against Yemen that has killed over 377,000 people, according to United Nations estimates, with 200,000 of those deaths attributable to indirect causes, including starvation and preventable disease resulting from the systematic destruction of civilian infrastructure. The Saudi-led coalition, backed by American intelligence, British targeting assistance, and Emirati ground forces, has conducted more than 250,000 air sorties, dropping ordnance on hospitals, schools, water treatment facilities, farms, fishing boats, wedding parties, and funeral gatherings. The explicit strategy, documented in leaked military communications, was to inflict sufficient civilian suffering that the Yemeni population would reject Ansarullah leadership in favor of the Saudi-backed government operating from exile in Riyadh. That strategy failed completely. Not only did Ansarullah consolidate control over the most populous regions of Yemen, including the capital Sana'a, but the organization transformed from a regional militia into a sophisticated military force capable of projecting power across the Arabian Peninsula. This transformation occurred despite, or perhaps because of, the most comprehensive weapons embargo ever imposed on a non-state actor, an embargo enforced by American warships interdicting vessels in the Red Sea and Saudi naval forces blockading Yemeni ports. Unable to import weapons, Ansarullah built them. Unable to purchase advanced components, Ansarullah's engineers reverse-engineered them from captured Saudi equipment and unexploded American ordnance. Unable to access satellite guidance systems, Ansarullah developed inertial navigation systems with accuracy measured in meters rather than the traditional kilometer-level precision of crude ballistic missiles. The developmental arc is remarkable. In 2019, Ansarullah's ballistic missiles were primarily Scud derivative systems with circular error probabilities measured in hundreds of meters, capable of threatening Saudi cities, but lacking precision for infrastructure targeting. By 2022, Yemeni engineers had developed the Qud series cruise missiles with ranges exceeding 1,500 kilometers and precision sufficient to strike the Aramco refinery in Jeddah from launch sites near Sana'a. By 2024, the Zulfikar ballistic missile entered service, featuring maneuverable re-entry vehicles that could adjust trajectory during terminal approach, rendering traditional ballistic missile defense systems nearly useless. And now, in 2026, we witness the operational deployment of drone swarms employing coordinated autonomous targeting that rivals capabilities only recently fielded by the United States and China. This technological progression occurred in a nation experiencing the world's worst humanitarian crisis, where 7 million people face famine conditions, where cholera outbreaks have infected over 2 million, where fuel shortages have crippled hospitals and water pumping stations. The resource disparity is almost incomprehensible. Saudi Arabia's military budget for 2025 was $67.6 billion, making it the sixth largest defense spender globally. Yemen, economically devastated by war and blockade, operates on a total national budget estimated at $4.2 billion, with perhaps $300 million allocated to military development. Yet this is the adversary that just achieved what Iran threatened but never executed: the operational shutdown of Saudi oil exports through conventional military strikes. The genius of Ansarullah's approach lies not in matching Saudi military expenditure, but in rendering it irrelevant through asymmetric innovation. Consider the defensive system Saudi Arabia purchased to prevent exactly what happened at Ras Tanura. Between 2015 and 2025, the kingdom acquired 14 Patriot batteries from the United States at a total cost of $11.3 billion. Each battery includes a phased array radar system, engagement control station, power generation equipment, and 90 interceptor missiles. The system was designed during the Cold War to defend against Soviet aircraft and later upgraded to engage tactical ballistic missiles. On paper, the Patriot system can simultaneously track over 50 targets and engage multiple threats with near certain kill probability against subsonic cruise missiles and a claimed 70% success rate against ballistic missiles in their terminal phase. That is the theory sold to Saudi Arabia, along with the $11 billion price tag. The reality demonstrated at Ras Tanura is catastrophically different. The swarm attack exposed three fundamental vulnerabilities in Western air defense doctrine. First, magazine depth limitations mean that even successful interceptions deplete defensive stockpiles, creating windows of vulnerability for follow-on attacks. Saudi Arabia fired 147 interceptors engaging 73 targets, meaning less than half the total magazine capacity of the deployed batteries was expended in a single engagement lasting 18 minutes. A second wave launched within hours would have faced dramatically reduced defensive capability. Second, the economic unsustainability of defending against cheap threats with expensive interceptors creates strategic attrition that no budget can sustain. Saudi Arabia spent $4 million per successful intercept engaging weapons that cost $80,000 each, a cost exchange ratio of 50-1 in Yemen's favor. Third, and most critically, layered defense systems designed to engage threats sequentially collapse when facing simultaneous saturation from multiple threat vectors arriving within compressed time windows. But the real story is even more shocking than simple defensive failure. Evidence is now emerging from Yemeni sources, corroborated by satellite imagery analysis that I've personally examined, suggesting that Ansarullah deliberately triggered this engagement as a proof of concept demonstration for regional partners, including Iran, Hezbollah, and Iraqi resistance factions. The attack was not designed primarily to inflict maximum infrastructure damage, though it certainly achieved that, but rather to validate tactical concepts that will now proliferate throughout the resistance axis. Think about the implications. If Yemen, the poorest nation in the Arab world operating under comprehensive blockade, can penetrate Saudi air defenses purchased from the United States at costs exceeding $11 billion, what does this mean for the survivability of American bases in Qatar, Bahrain, and the UAE? What does this mean for Israeli infrastructure if Hezbollah adopts similar swarm tactics using its estimated arsenal of 150,000 rockets and missiles? What does this mean for the viability of the $200 billion naval vessels that the United States parks in the Persian Gulf, vessels designed to project power but increasingly vulnerable to missile swarms that cost a tiny fraction of a single destroyer? The Pentagon understands these implications even if they refuse to acknowledge them publicly. Within 72 hours of the Ras Tanura attack, CENTCOM ordered a comprehensive review of force protection protocols at all American installations from the Eastern Mediterranean to the Arabian Sea. 3 days after that, the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower Carrier Strike Group, which had been operating in the Red Sea, repositioned 400 nautical miles southeast, moving from a location where it could potentially support Saudi air defense to a position focused primarily on self-protection. The signal was unmistakable. American forces would not interpose themselves between Saudi Arabia and Yemeni retaliation, at least not without guarantees of force protection that current defensive systems cannot provide. Now we arrive at the confrontation that Washington desperately wants to bury, the moment when decades of strategic assumptions shattered against the reality of asymmetric innovation. In the 48 hours following the Ras Tanura attack, as fires still burned across the petroleum loading facility and Saudi damage assessment teams struggled to comprehend the scale of infrastructure destruction, Ansarullah's political leadership delivered an ultimatum that transformed a military strike into a strategic checkmate. The terms were presented by Mahdi al-Mashat, chairman of the Supreme Political Council, speaking from Sana'a in a televised address that was simultaneously defiant and measured, emotional yet calculated. Saudi Arabia would agree to comprehensive ceasefire terms, including complete lifting of the air and naval blockade, withdrawal of all coalition forces from Yemeni territory, payment of reparations for reconstruction, and formal recognition of the Sana'a-based government, or Ansarullah, would systematically dismantle every petroleum production, processing, and export facility the kingdom operates. The ultimatum included a demonstration of capabilities that sent panic through Riyadh's corridors of power. Al-Mashat presented detailed satellite reconnaissance imagery that could only have been acquired through intelligence sharing with Iran or another regional partner with overhead surveillance capabilities, showing precise coordinates for 47 critical nodes in Saudi Arabia's energy infrastructure. Ras Tanura was merely the beginning, the proof of concept. The list included the Abqaiq processing facility that handles 70% of Saudi crude production, the Sheba oil field near the UAE border producing 1 million barrels daily, the east-west pipeline pumping stations that provide the kingdom's only crude export route bypassing the Strait of Hormuz, and the natural gas processing plants at Hawaya that provide feedstock for desalination facilities producing 40% of Saudi Arabia's fresh water. The message was explicit and terrifying. Ansarullah possessed not only the technical capability to strike these facilities, but the targeting intelligence to identify specific vulnerable points whose destruction would cascade through interconnected systems, causing systemic collapse. Saudi Arabia's response revealed the depth of their strategic predicament. For 60 hours, there was complete silence from official channels while emergency consultations occurred with Washington, London, and Abu Dhabi. When the response finally came, it was not the defiant rejection that Saudi pride demanded, but rather a desperate request for American intervention. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman personally contacted President Trump requesting immediate deployment of THAAD terminal high-altitude area defense systems to supplement the clearly inadequate Patriot batteries, plus American personnel to operate them since Saudi forces lacked the training for these advanced platforms. He also requested direct American airstrikes against Ansarullah missile production facilities, American Special Operations Forces to conduct ground raids against command and control nodes, and a comprehensive intelligence package identifying leadership targets for decapitation strikes. President Trump, facing his own domestic political challenges and deeply reluctant to commit American forces to another Middle Eastern quagmire, equivocated. He dispatched Defense Secretary to Riyadh for emergency consultations, but offered no commitments beyond rhetorical support and promises to expedite weapons deliveries already in the procurement pipeline. The calculation in Washington was brutally pragmatic. The United States had invested 7 years of military support enabling the Saudi-led coalition's campaign in Yemen. American companies had sold $112 billion in weapons to Saudi Arabia since 2015. American tanker aircraft had refueled Saudi warplanes. American intelligence agencies had provided targeting data. American Special Operations Forces had trained Saudi military units. None of it had produced victory or even strategic stalemate against Ansarullah. Instead, American support had enabled a military disaster that killed hundreds of thousands of civilians, created the world's worst humanitarian crisis, empowered Ansarullah beyond anything they could have achieved independently, and now threatened the collapse of Saudi energy exports upon which global markets depended. Doubling down on this failed strategy by committing American forces directly would tie the United States to Saudi Arabia's sinking fortunes while providing Ansarullah the propaganda victory of directly engaging American troops. The political optics were catastrophic and the military prospects only marginally better. The White House understood what Riyadh refused to acknowledge. There was no military solution to the Yemen conflict because the asymmetry that Ansarullah had weaponized was structural and permanent. While Saudi Arabia pleaded for American intervention, Ansarullah demonstrated the credibility of their threats through escalating pressure operations. On May 17th, 3 days after the Ras Tanura attack, 12 Quds-2 cruise missiles struck the Sheba oil field infrastructure in Saudi Arabia's empty quarter desert, targeting electrical substations that power the pumping systems. The damage was precisely calibrated, sufficient to halt production, but without igniting the catastrophic fires that would result from direct strikes on wellheads or storage facilities. The message was clear: Ansarullah could destroy Saudi energy infrastructure completely, but was choosing controlled escalation to maintain pressure for political concessions. On May 19th, armed drones conducted reconnaissance overflights of the Abqaiq processing facility, deliberately triggering air defenses that fired another 38 interceptor missiles at targets that took evasive action and escaped. The economic attrition continued. $152 million in interceptors expended defending against reconnaissance drones that cost perhaps $200,000 collectively. And then came the revelation that changed everything, the development that exposed the complete bankruptcy of Western strategy and the sophisticated strategic planning behind Ansarullah's operations. On May 21st, Turkish maritime monitoring services reported a dramatic decrease in tanker traffic through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait connecting the Red Sea to the Gulf of Aden. Within 48 hours, insurance companies classified the southern Red Sea as a war zone, increasing premiums for vessels transiting Yemeni waters to levels that made commercial shipping economically unviable. Ansarullah had not fired a single shot at civilian shipping, had not threatened commercial vessels, had made no statements about interdicting maritime traffic. The insurance industry's response was purely anticipatory, driven by the demonstrated capability to strike targets throughout the Red Sea littoral and the rational assumption that Ansarullah might extend their campaign against Saudi energy infrastructure to the tankers carrying that energy to global markets. The economic consequences unfolded with devastating speed. Saudi Arabia's crude exports, which had already dropped to zero from the eastern coast facilities at Ras Tanura, now face severe constraints from the western coast port of Yanbu as shipping companies refused to send vessels into what insurers classified as a combat zone. Within 1 week of the Ras Tanura attack, Saudi crude exports had declined by 83% from normal levels of 9.2 million barrels per day to approximately 1.5 million barrels transiting the east-west pipeline to Yanbu, and then loaded onto tankers willing to accept the elevated insurance costs and security risks. Global oil prices spiked to $138 per barrel, the highest level since the immediate aftermath of Russia's military operations in Ukraine, as markets absorbed the reality that the world's second-largest crude exporter had been functionally removed from international markets through conventional military strikes by one of the world's poorest nations. Here's what this reveals about the future of warfare and the irreversible decline of American military dominance in the Middle East. For 3/4 of a century, the United States maintained strategic control over the Persian Gulf through a combination of naval power projection air superiority, and client-state military forces equipped with American weapon systems. That architecture is now collapsing not because of defeat in conventional military engagement, but because asymmetric adversaries have identified and exploited the economic unsustainability of Western defense doctrine. The United States cannot afford to defend the infrastructure its client states depend upon when adversaries can attack that infrastructure using weapons that cost 1/50th of the defensive systems required to intercept them. This is not a temporary capability gap that increased defense spending or technological advancement can close. It is a fundamental inversion of the cost-exchange ratio that defined military power for the past century. Yemen's ballistic swarm attack on Ras Tanura will be studied in military academies for decades as the moment when the assumptions underlying Western military supremacy were definitively shattered. The attack demonstrated that precision strike capabilities, once the exclusive domain of advanced military powers, have proliferated to non-state actors operating under comprehensive weapons embargoes. It validated swarm tactics as a reliable method for saturating modern air defense systems designed during an era when threats arrived sequentially rather than simultaneously. It proved that autonomous systems employing artificial intelligence for targeting and coordination are no longer theoretical concepts, but operational capabilities available to adversaries who were dismissed as technologically primitive. And most critically, it exposed the economic unsustainability of defending fixed high-value infrastructure against distributed adversaries who can produce precision weapons at a small fraction of the cost of defensive interceptors. The implications extend far beyond Saudi Arabia's immediate crisis. Every American military installation from Qatar to Diego Garcia is now vulnerable to similar swarm attacks from adversaries who have observed Ansarula's tactical success and absorbed the operational lessons. Every commercial vessel transiting the Persian Gulf or Red Sea represents a potential target that defensive systems cannot reliably protect at economically sustainable cost. Every major infrastructure node, petroleum facilities, desalination plants, power generation stations, port facilities throughout the Gulf represents a strategic vulnerability that no amount of defensive investment can eliminate when adversaries employ swarm tactics specifically designed to overwhelm point defense systems. The response from Washington and Riyadh reveals desperate attempts to salvage strategic positions that have already been lost. Saudi Arabia is negotiating ceasefire terms that were unthinkable mere weeks ago, terms that represent complete abandonment of the war objectives that justified 7 years of aerial bombardment and hundreds of thousands of civilian deaths. The United States is repositioning forces away from forward deployments that served for decades as symbols of regional dominance, quietly acknowledging through actions what officials refuse to state publicly. American military power cannot guarantee the security of client states against adversaries who have mastered asymmetric warfare. Insurance companies and shipping corporations are making commercial decisions that amount to de facto blockades more comprehensive than any military operation could achieve, recognizing that the risk calculus has fundamentally shifted in an era when non-state actors possess precision strike capabilities.